see if it'll advance. Cool. All right. Off and running. So, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Morning.
True confessions, I'm not a full-time Islander. I'm only a 25% Islander.
Let's get it.
I've had a cabin here since 1978, so I do have a strong foothold here. By the way, we're recording this. Is that okay with everybody? And I usually do this in about an hour, but I've got more time than that today, so I'm going to make it more interactive. That means if you speak up, you're going to be on the recording. Still okay? Okay. So, what are my credentials for being able to talk to you? Well, I have a degree in French. I could deliver this whole thing in French if you want.
Please, no way.
I'm a psychologist, had a private practice for 20 years, retired from that, went to work for Washington State Parks. We have about 130 state parks, and my job was to take care of park staff in traumatic situations. We have about 25 deaths a year in our park system. And rangers are pretty sturdy people, so they handle that stuff pretty well. But the park system also includes 18-year-old park aides for whom this is their first job and so forth. So I did that for 7 years, retired from that. Pandemic came along. I went back to work for State of Washington Department of Health, King County Public Health, all of you here, Vashon Be Prepared, and Medical Reserve Corps of Issaquah, which is where I live 75% of the time. And I did that full time for 3 years for no pay. So now I'm trying to back out of it a little bit, but I like the teaching, so I'll still be doing that. So, by the way, there is no psychology training program in disaster psychology. There's no such thing, really. Probably because you can't make a living at it. So it's mostly volunteers that do this stuff. And I'm in my 23rd year of disaster psychology with the American Red Cross. And so sometimes I will go to disasters we have to go for a minimum of 10 days. If they're going to fly me somewhere to a disaster, they want to get their money's worth, so I have to stay at least 10 days. I'd like to make this interactive, so feel free to ask me, make comments. Any of you have experience with disasters on either end of it? Being a disaster victim or a responder? Yeah? Okay, good. So if you have comments as we go along, I'd love to hear them. Okay. So this is what we're going to do. Actually, we're going to do a little more than this. I'm not going to read the slides to you. I figure you can do that. But we'll at least do that. Let's see. So this is this training is aimed at responders that don't have any mental health training. Do any of you have any mental health training? You do? You do? Okay. Excellent. If you all had mental health training, I'd be adding content to this, because those with mental health training can do more than this, but this is basic for everybody. Let's see. But you should have access to people with mental health training. In the event of a disaster here on the island, you'll probably run into people that are going to be needing more than you can offer, needing more than this training is going to allow you to give. And so you're going to need to find people like Jenna that you can pass this person off to. And how are we going to recognize Jenna? We're going to have vests, right?
Yes.
Blue vests? Is it blue?
Mauve.
Mauve.
changed for me.
Changed from blue.
Someone
okay.
else has to do this.
Okay, so that's how you're gonna recognize the mental health people on the island. Let's see. Okay. So causes of disaster reactions. You can just look at that list and you can see that this can be pretty hard for all of us. Let's imagine you're dealing with some losses right before the disaster happens. Right? You're in the middle of a recent divorce maybe, or somebody in your family has died, and then the disaster comes. That's going to be pretty hard on you. Or let's imagine you're working in your own neighborhood. Or the people you're working with are your friends. Or let's imagine that the ground is still trembling. I wouldn't feel safe either. Or you've got a trauma history. When I worked with rangers, and we had park rangers, and we had a situation where maybe a 10-year-old boy drowned in a lake. My model involved sending trained rangers out to respond to rangers, so I wasn't going out on every incident. But in the event of a 10-year-old boy drowning in a lake, if I had a ranger about to go respond to that, and he had a 10-year-old boy, I wouldn't send him. So it's just too dicey. It evokes too many emotions. Disaster characteristics. Disaster characteristics.
Phil walks in and everybody laughs. What's that tell you? No, I'm sorry.
You guys too.
Something about
I'll put another one that has about disasters.
How about time? What's the difference between a disaster that happens at midnight versus 12 noon?
Most people are in bed.
Yeah. Suppose it's January, midnight, rain,
Snowing.
snowing, right. Yeah, yeah, that's the weather. Notice. You don't get notice for earthquakes. You do for hurricanes and tornadoes. Notice makes a big difference. Cause. What about man-made? Cause is either natural or man-made. What do you think the difference is?
Blame.
Yeah. Well, and, okay, any other comments on that?
Well, trust maybe, I mean, if another person causes an incident or trauma, you tend to not trust people, right? I mean,
Right.
Guilt.
Guilt.
I think man-made would be harder to adjust, because you don't know.
Okay. Hang on, I want to get back to the guilt.
For a man-made problem.
Okay, yeah, I could buy that. So she said, what's your name?
Patricia.
Patricia. Patricia said man-made would be harder. What do the rest of you think about that?
Might be harder emotionally because you probably would project anger.
Could have been avoidable.
Right.
Yeah.
I wasn't thinking
Yeah.
it that way, I was thinking, well, what's next? If you don't,
Well, that too. That too. People tend to understand that bad things happen in nature. But somebody going up to the top of a hotel in Las Vegas with a high-powered rifle,
Yeah.
people don't understand that.
Blame.
Yeah. Right. Right. So all those things affect the size of your reaction to the disaster. So this one, I don't much like this slide. By the way, not all these slides are official CERT slides. I made some of my own and put them on the CERT background. So, and you'll also see Red Cross slides, because I teach a similar thing for the Red Cross. So These things, I've never seen all of these at once. This is basically the, what is it, the fight or flight reaction expanded. But this is what you see on the outside, or what you could see on the outside. But what's going on the inside? What's happening is stress hormones, in an emergency, stress hormones are released. So you've got cortisol, norepinephrine, and adrenaline floating around in your brain. The purpose of that is to equip you to outrun the bear. Once you have successfully outrun the bear, the level of those stress hormones drops back to normal. So the stress hormones just equip you. So it's a plus from an evolutionary point of view. But what happens if you don't outrun the bear? Well, what happens if the crisis is extended?
Seemed obvious.
What happens, I'll tell you, is those stress hormones stay floating around. And what happens with that, in the long term, what goes up? Anxiety, depression, digestive problems, heart disease, sleep problems, and weight gain. What goes down? Memory, concentration, ability to fight infections. So it's not a good thing to have all these stress hormones be floating around for a long time. And that's what we had in COVID. It's exactly what we had in COVID. By the way, there'll be a quiz on this. Okay, psychological symptoms of trauma in different domains. What might you see in the emotional domain in anybody that's dealing with a disaster, a disaster victim? What might you see in the emotional domain?
Anxiety.
Anguish.
Crying is not an emotion, yes. Anguish,
Anguish.
yeah.
Anxiety.
Despair.
Anxiety, despair, yep.
Rage.
Rage, yep.
Depression.
Depression. Yeah, you wouldn't see depression right away, but you would eventually. Okay, good, that's good. How about cognitive? What might you see in that domain?
Short attention span.
Yeah. Inability to focus, yeah.
Hearing loss.
Hearing loss. Say more about that.
Well, if there's been an explosion or something, it could have
Oh.
this.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that all
It's
possible.
more of a physical reaction than cognitive, but yeah, you might see that, yeah.
Disbelief, kind of, you don't believe this happened to you, or there isn't your feet like literally aren't on the ground, but mentally you're not there.
Right, yeah, I think
Confusion.
that's true. What's that, Jenna?
Confusion.
Confusion, yeah. And spiritual, what might you see in the spiritual domain?
The pearly gates.
Not yet, thank you.
Loss of meaning, fear that God has abandoned you,
Yeah,
depending on a person's theology, fear that God's going to punish him more. That's the kind of God you believe in.
yeah, actually, the spiritual one is interesting. What's that?
Or just the opposite.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We depend more on our God or our higher power.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a bimodal distribution. It goes both ways. Yeah, exactly right.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I wonder if in different parts of the country, if that spiritual dimension is different, because coming from the East Coast and living here now, I think how I would understand spirituality is very different. So I wonder if you've come across that in your,
And Bible bells are.
Oh, yeah, Bible belt, yeah.
well, I didn't mean quite so, but that's a good point, but I mean, where the community is based around religion versus where it's much more a-religious, like in some urban areas, et cetera. And I know it's changing in America, but it's such a provocative thought for me right now.
I think it would more often be a factor back in the East Coast, and especially in the Bible Belt, that people would be thinking about that issue much more often.
Evangelicals.
Yeah, yeah.
Is there a is there any kind of information that would indicate a more healthy or more effective response to trauma, one versus the other end of that spectrum?
We'll get to that. No, not there yet. But if I forget to comment on that, then get to me again. So this is a Red Cross slide that talks about how you might see somebody respond in these different domains in the event of a disaster. And I think if we look at thinking, top left, I think we've got most of those. Difficulty concentrating, poor memory, increased worry, preoccupation about getting sick, or displaying symptoms, focusing on the negative. And then emotions, anger, agitation, moodiness, depression, irritability. We actually got more than that. Let's see what else we've got here. Spirituality, we covered that. Relationships, you don't see effect in the domain of relationships right away. That takes a little time to show up. Let's see, behaviors. Let's see all that. I guess what I see most often right away are intrusive thoughts and images, with images of the fire or the whatever it was. Just sort of appearing in your head when you didn't try to think it or imagine it. And then sleep disturbance, I see that a whole lot.
Is that kind of like PTSD? When you said images, because images can trigger
Yeah, it's
reactions.
a little bit like it, but not in duration. PTSD has to be established for, I forget how long it is, 3 months or something. Whereas this, if changes in sleep and intrusive thoughts and images occurring in most of us in the immediate aftermath of a disaster would be normal. Yeah. Okay. This actually is a cert slide. So physical symptoms. What do I want to say about that? Increase in drug consumption, that's not going to be right away. And in fact, I have not seen that one.
Alcohol maybe.
What's that?
Alcohol maybe.
Alcohol maybe, yeah. Yeah.
Right away for a lot of people.
Hyperactivity is a little interesting. What I do see is people that they can't focus. They feel like, oh, I got to do this. Oh no, I got to do that first. Oh no, I got to do this first. So they're sort of scattered, and they can't get organized to do anything, and they're not even sure what's the most important thing to do. So it looks like hyperactivity.
Is that possibly caused by the high adrenaline?
Yeah. Yeah, adrenaline will do that. Makes it harder to focus. Right. Team well-being, we're going to talk more about this a little bit later, but we do want to talk about actions that you can take before, during, and after, and what the team leader can do before, during, and after. And learning how to manage stress, both for disaster victims and your colleagues, everybody else in this room. So, how to reduce stress. If you go on Google and just Googled stress reduction techniques, you get 200, right? So, this is, my reaction to this is, well, duh. Of course, you have to get enough sleep, you have to exercise, eat a balanced diet. The biggest bang for the buck here is this one, connect with others. There's a ton of research on this, actually. I'll give you just one example. I read a study of breast cancer survivors post-mastectomy, women divided into 2 groups. One had access to an ongoing support group afterwards, and the other group did not have that access. And they followed these two groups for quite a few years. I don't remember exactly how many. And the result was that the women in the group that had the social support were happier, reported fewer physical problems, and get this, they lived on average 14 months longer. It's pretty powerful. And that's just one study, but there are a ton of studies talking about how important it is to connect with, to have a close social network of at least some people that you feel like you can be honest with and trust.
And with a group like CERT, that could be within that group.
That could be within that. Yeah, I think
It's really good to connect with your group.
it's actually good to have some people in your social network where you work and others in your home life. Yeah. Because the people at home, no matter how good a listener that person is, he or she may not understand what you're going through every day at work. So.
This might be a little bit of an overshare, but however, there have been times in my life where I've experienced things that were very difficult, and the most powerful thing was being with other people who had experienced something similar. I think bar none. I mean, you have to get a lot of different kinds of help, I think, when you're dealing with something really difficult. But just this notion of not, I remember my reaction was, okay, I'm not crazy.
Right.
You know, this is actually something that's common.
Right.
And I think it's huge.
I think that's a great point. If you're with somebody that's been through something similar, you have this belief that they understand at a little deeper level than somebody else might. Wait, you said something else I wanted to comment on. What was it? Yep.
Well, I think one of the things is that they can validate some of the experiences, the emotions and feelings that you have, or the thoughts that you have, and they can say to you, yeah, that's real. You know, you're not imagining that.
Right.
And it is at a high rate.
Right.
It's intrusive, or the depth of the feeling, or the absence of the feeling. And that should resolve over time. Those people that have similar experiences can speak to that and can provide reassurance that things will get better. Takes one to know one.
That's actually the point that I wanted to echo. That's an excellent point. And this is jumping ahead a little bit, but let me go back to this slide here. Part of what we can do is we're going to talk about listening, but after we listen, part of what we can do is help normalize people's reactions. We can communicate that if you're reacting with any of these right here, that's normal. You're not going crazy. That was the point you made. And you get that with somebody who's been through a similar experience. But all of you can do that, even if you haven't been through a similar experience. It's just that it comes a little more quickly and deeply if you do have somebody that's been through a similar experience.
And just the power of somebody listening and validating your feeling.
That's really powerful. We're going to talk a lot about that. Yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
biologically, aren't we, I mean, we're kind of wired to be social and connected, right? I mean, there's these fears of being shunned by the group, and so when someone else is telling you, oh yeah, I hear you, it's a sense of like, I'm not being dropped into, nothing.
Yeah, we are wired to be with others and to cooperate, otherwise we would never have survived from an evolutionary point of view. And another comment on what you just said about communicating that it will get better. We'll talk more about this too, but you have to be careful about reassurances that you give. You can't promise anything unless you're 100% certain. So I wouldn't say it will get better, actually, but we'll talk about what you can say. a little bit later. Okay, let's see. So, this may look like a cert slide, but I actually wrote it. So this is a lot like any disease. The earlier you catch it, the more successful you can be. So I'm talking about reducing stress. So I think it's useful for all of you to think about what's the first sign that your body gives you that you're starting to get stressed out. And I ask this question to every group that I talk to, and I get things like, oh, it's tightness in my chest. That's the first thing that I notice. What do I notice in myself? I notice that I get a little irritable, and I start to move fast. I've had some odd responses. Somebody said to me once, I get a metallic taste in my mouth. It doesn't matter what it is, it's just that you need to know what it is for you, so that you can take some action when you get that. Does anybody know what it is for them right now? Yeah?
I sweat in a different way than if it was hotter. I was working, my hands will start to sweat, and it's just a little different armpits feeling and stuff that is just different than if I was working in the garden sweating. You know, I can be cold, and that's what happens with me.
And when that happens, are you aware that it's happening?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, you're lucky, because you know when to stop and do something to reduce that stress. You're early on, you're catching it early on. That's the whole point of this. Anybody else have?
Fight or flight
That's what you notice in yourself?
instantly, and then deal with it.
Uh-huh. Okay. Yeah, good.
In the very beginning, I press my lips together. And every time I notice myself doing that, I stop and say, what is it? But it happens, I notice it.
Yeah.
We'll look for that.
That's my giveaway now.
Yeah. Well, those of you who know it are lucky in a sense. And those of you who don't know it, think about it. Or observe yourself more carefully. Because if you don't catch it, it gets harder and harder to do something about it. What you can do when you catch it is just take a deep breath. Just sort of stop, pause, take a deep breath. You can talk with other people. You've got somebody you trust around you. But if you don't do something, the first negative outcome is you're not so good at being a helper anymore. Yeah.
So I get what you're saying about the first signs of stress.
Yeah.
And I think maybe we all have them for different levels depending on where the stress is hitting us at that moment. So I've been in some situations where I had to go from very restful state to had to run to an emergency.
Oh, yeah.
And so as I'm running, you know, the stress is in the adrenaline setting.
Yeah.
And I knew I wasn't going to be able to make it to them if I kept just running. And so I had to stop, just like bend over, get that blood into my head again. It was just so much hitting my, you know, so much chemical hitting my system.
Right.
Is there a way around that besides stopping and, you know, getting the blood to the head again or something?
Well, you knew you weren't going to get there in time? You knew it was hopeless? Is that what you're saying?
The perception was, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it would be like, take a deep breath, stop. This is like, I taught a wilderness navigation course last week, and I talked about getting lost in the woods. I'm a mushroom hunter, so I talk to mushroomers who get lost in the woods. And any of you been lost, even briefly? Are you aware that there's this sudden onset of panic, maybe not huge panic, but a little bit, when you realize that you're not at all where you thought you were.
Yes.
Same thing, it's that panic. You have to stop and sit down. Panic is a factor in probably 90% of wilderness emergencies, because we make the worst decisions about what to do when we're in that state. I gave this quote in that class, supposedly from Daniel Boone, but who knows. It's something like, I don't think I've ever been lost, but there have been periods of 4 or 5 days where I didn't know where I was. So, we can laugh, and we probably should, but the point is, the panic is optional. You know, he was lost, well, he didn't know where he was, but he wasn't panicking about it. And you can get there.
But panic is often the first response, right?
For probably all of us.
I was in Boston, in a building, looking out at Copley Square, the end of the Boston Marathon finish.
Oh.
And we all saw something, and we didn't know what it was. And then smoke, and then it got larger, and then I was sitting with people, and everybody panicked, including myself.
Yeah.
Couldn't get through to anybody.
Right.
And, but then we all had to make our own plans about how we were gonna leave.
Right.
And get to safety. But right now I'm recalling, it hasn't come up a lot, how terrifying that was.
Right.
And how real the panic is.
Well, because our daughter was also supposed to be near the finish line.
Well,
Oh, Lord.
even more than that, I
Yeah.
had been literally there less than an hour ago where the bombing happened.
Right.
So, and I can't tell you how many people I knew who had been there and had left.
Right.
But I'm thinking about the panic now because now I have some breathing techniques that I use. I'm wondering if I had those then, would I have been able to get out of the panic? But that was, so I know what it's like to be in a situation, and I was far enough away that I was safe, but nobody knew, right? Because we all had to shelter in place for 3 days.
Right, right.
While they searched for those brothers. But anyway, I'm just thinking about that, and that panic is really, literally real.
Would have been really strong in
How
that
you
thing.
disconnect from everything, and how you find yourself back to center is
Right.
what you're talking about here.
Right, and that was Steve's question too.
Yeah.
How do you get yourself back? When the panic is big, how do you get yourself back
Yeah.
centered? Ooh.
How do you know you're even panicking when you're running around like a chicken with your head cut off, which is what I do?
I promise you.
Well, no, I think that's a point.
But it's a good point.
You may not.
You may not.
I mean, you don't know, like, I mean, I'm not proud of this, but when I'm freaked out, I'm not like, well, you know, you have decisions here. It's more like, I'm in freak out mode.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm not proud of it, but I don't, you know.
Yeah, Heidi.
I mean, I feel like this should be added to the list, but I mean, what helps me when I'm in situations of panic is to have some sort of, basically what you've already said, but like that acceptance, that self-acceptance that this is a panic response. And then once I can, because if I put blame or shame onto that level of my reaction of like, oh, I need to be doing all these things, I should not be panicking, and then just be, there at least needs to be a moment of fierce self-acceptance of it's normal, like what you already said,
Yeah.
normalizing it, and
Yeah.
so anyway, I just feel like.
If you can manage to tell yourself that.
If you're seeing your cues, if you're stressing, if you're starting to do the first signs, and if you're starting to read yourself a little bit easier, maybe it'd be easier as you see yourself respond to that. But I don't know.
Yeah.
No.
The bit about catching the first sign of stress your body gives you is not really what we're talking about now. It's like full-on panic immediately. It's like it's not starting low and getting higher and higher. It's like full-on. But to the extent that you can not do anything, stop, breathe, accept this that's going on inside you, and know that decisions you make when you're panicked are likely to be poor. So therefore, don't make any.
We
For a
have to
few
do
minutes.
something when an earthquake hits. You either get under the desk or you get out of the building.
Yeah.
So you have to choose.
Yeah, that's, yeah. This is tricky stuff. Well, we'll talk more about breathing. I actually have a breathing exercise I want to do shortly. But I said the first negative outcome, if you don't catch it early, is your ability to help others is impaired. The second one is you get impaired. If you don't take care of it then, and the stress gets more and more and more, then you become impaired. And the third is the mission gets sacrificed. You're on a team. You're working with others. You're not able to pull your weight. So it just gets worse and worse. Okay, this, I don't know why this never shows up on, you know, you Google stress reduction techniques, you never see this. This is, and I use this with people all the time, because I don't know whether the Google list is going to be right for you of stress reduction techniques. Does number 1 work for you? How about number 7? I don't know. What I do know is I can ask people, what's the most helpful stress reduction thing that you have done? Everybody's had challenging times. We've all had to reduce our stress levels sometimes. What did we do? How did we do it? What worked? The other advantage to approaching it this way is that you're not telling somebody what to do. So, which generally speaking doesn't work. Okay, so we're going to try this, or at least I'm going to invite you to play along with me here. So, this is a 1-minute breathing exercise. Have a look at this and pick a level. You don't have to say it, just keep it in your mind. For how stressed am I right now? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to take a breath in to my count of 5, hold it to my count of 5, and release it to my count of 5. And that's 1 cycle. We're going to do 3 cycles. And you don't have to say anything. I'm going to do all the talking. Okay, here we go. Breath in, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let go, 2, 3, 4, 5. In, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let go, 2, 3, 4, 5. In, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let go, 2, 3, 4, 5. Pick another number. How many got worse? How many stayed the same? 3, 4, 5, 4. And so the rest of you got at least 1 notch calmer? Okay, so that took a minute. You don't expect to move the needle a whole lot in a minute, and you won't. But this is something, and I use this all the time. Yeah, Angela?
I just wanted to add to that exercise. If you stop at your inhalation and observe that point of stillness, and then exhale, stop, observe that point of stillness, and then breathe in. That point of stillness is very important.
Ooh, I like that. Does that come from your yoga instructing days?
Oh, it could.
Yeah.
Could I add to that?
Yeah.
Breathing is practice. And if you do this quite regularly, it's the whole internal experience beyond the external, oh, I've got to remember 555, or you do 448.
Right.
But my yoga teacher once said, the real meditation is breaking when you get distracted, it's coming back. It's not the process of breathing per se. It's that, oh, I'm here, and I want to be back to the breath.
Right.
And then I was reading the Pema Chodron, the Buddhist monk, says the same thing about breaking it's You know, the point of breathing is to have no thought so that you can actually allow, I think that's what you're saying, the thoughts that you need to come in to address the crisis, you want them to come in a more, less fraught way, and that's what breathing does. But it's that practice, I do this all the time, because I get, as you can hear my voice, I get stressed even talking in a crowd. All the time, to break that identification so that you can come back into the internal experience. I think that's how I experience the still point, because I think everybody's still point is, I mean, I'd like to hear more about what Jim thinks about still point, because I bet you my still point and Matt's still point are really different, just because of how we're wired, you know what I mean? So,
Do you want Jenna to say more about it?
sure.
That's okay.
So what, I realized somebody else had a question, and we'll get there. Hang on a second. So I used to meditate a lot, and the biggest obstacle in meditation is not the wandering mind, because we all have wandering minds. It's the self-criticism for having a wandering mind. So what you have to do is you have to say, you have to just observe the wandering mind sort of dispassionately, and you have to say, oh, there goes my mind again. I just need to bring it back here.
Right.
That's all. No, damn it, I'm doing this wrong. That's what hurts it. Yeah. Alan?
I was just going to mention, I was reading recently, and I won't be able to tell you much about this, but there is a physiological response that's beneficial when you're holding that breath. You're accumulating more carbon dioxide in your blood. And there's a benefit to doing that, rather than when people get stressed, they hyperventilate, which increases the stress. So there's something about holding the carbon dioxide in your blood that reduces the stress. And I can't, people should just Google carbon dioxide and stress and see what you come up with. There is a physiological.
My guess is it goes the other way. The faster you breathe, the more carbon dioxide you're building up. I'm not positive, but that would be my guess. I know that's how, when you hyperventilate,
The paper
that's what
bag.
happens.
Yeah, the old paper bag.
Yeah. At any rate,
So
yeah.
that holding, the opposite of that is holding the carbon dioxide in your body. When you're pushing too much oxygen into your system, somehow that, when you hyperventilate, you're actually creating more stress.
Yes, you do that, yeah.
But I've got to go back and look at it again, because I can't remember.
Well, you're making me curious. I'm going to look it up too. Yeah, Carla?
I love the succinctness of that key question. What has been the most helpful strategy for managing stress for you in the past?
Right.
Can you throw out a few anecdotes of what people's initial response to that is when you ask them that? Are they quiet for a minute? Are they, any anecdotes from your experience?
The only one I remember is when somebody asked me that question. And I was quiet for a while because I had to think back about what, it's not something I think about all the time. I had to recall the challenging situation that I was dealing with, and then I had to recall what I did in that moment. And for me, it's almost always getting out in nature, taking a hike, climbing a mountain, by myself. I have to be by myself. And to this day, that's what works the best for me. So.
For me, I tend to just kind of want to isolate and clean. I wish I had more stress, you know, but I do. I've had incidences where, like I had a really disturbing dream that could or could not have been real, and it was the middle of winter, and I went out and scrubbed my deck on my hands and knees, and by the time I got halfway through, I was able to go in and actually discuss it with my husband very calmly. And, yeah, so it's like I tend to clean.
Well,
Come
you
to
know,
my house when you're stressed.
Well, yeah, I come to my house when I'm stressed.
there's something about the feeling of accomplishment
Mm.
Yeah.
that adds to this. I tend, that's another thing I do, I tend to pick out little things that have a discernible endpoint. Like I was doing psychotherapy for 20 years. You never know when it's over. So it didn't give me that satisfaction. If I went out in my garage and built a birdhouse, I know when I'm done. And that gave me some satisfaction. So I tend to pick out, I get a list, I actually write things down, old school. And I write down things that are small, have a discernible end, easily accomplished. And then I cross them off, and then I post that list somewhere where my eyes will fall on it for the next few days.
And I think you answered, both of you answered my question, which is that a person stops for a minute.
Yeah,
They go inside.
yeah,
They might take a deep breath.
right.
And they go deep down into their history and their deepest self. You've given them that opportunity to go in.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah, Jim.
And one of the strategies that a lot of people use is just to do something normal. You make a cup of tea, get your mind off of some activity, cleaning, whatever, but do something that's normal.
Some people find help with routines,
Yes.
get back into your routine. Yeah,
So it's a question of regaining control.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. What about the rest of you? What's the strategy that worked best for you in challenging times? Yeah,
I move furniture. Like, I can control my space. I mean, I realized this about myself after, I didn't realize this until I realized every time I was in a really stressful situation, I would, a lot of times I'd end up moving it back to the way it was. But just moving, changing.
Just a
the
different
way the
arrangement.
Space
Yeah.
is that I live in and looking at it, trying to figure out where things look best.
oh, I like that.
And sometimes I'll just wake up after not being able to sleep at night,
Uh-huh.
thinking about things, and I'll wake up and feel like, oh, God, that's in the wrong place. I need to move this chair.
Does moving furniture take 100% of your attention, so you're unable to think about whatever the troubling incident
Right,
is?
right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
to change the way the space is, and then I can go back and,
I
but
love
that's my
it.
problem.
I love that response, Lori.
I have pretty sensitive dogs, so if I get stressed out, my dogs pick up on that. And I find that helping them calm down reassures me as well.
Right. Right. Yeah, Heidi?
I do, I focus on self-care and the really basics, especially if I have to still like remain stressed and still do a job or something like that.
Uh-huh.
So I, like basic self-care, like do I need a glass of water? Do I have to go to the bathroom? Get up and go to the bathroom, you know, it's like the active, like just really get into the basics and really go central of what I'm overlooking in my care.
Oh, I like that too, yeah.
I think movement, any kind of movement, you know, whether you're
Like-
scrubbing something or just walking or, I think sitting down can really elevate my stress.
Maybe what all these have in common is what I just said, the inability to focus on the disturbing issue. You're doing something that's distracting you, taking your attention. When I was in graduate school, I took up juggling because I found I couldn't juggle and worry about my dissertation at the same time. So, wait a minute, somebody had something over here.
Well, I was just thinking about having family members who are differently able. And if you do the breathing exercises,
Yeah,
most people, even if they're differently able, can do a breathing exercise. And that's pretty helpful because everybody's talking about movement, which is something I do, but not everybody can do that.
oh, good point.
To the degree that
Yeah,
it would relieve the stress and anxiety. And anxiety and stress is incompatible with relaxation, and
right.
that's what you're doing with that breathing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, thank you.
I was gonna say, I think it's different depending on whether you're by yourself or at work or whatever.
Uh-huh.
and I deal with those things differently, but I work in DC, about 2 blocks from the White House at 9/11. And so we were inside the perimeter that was immediately set up, but when that happened, in the office, we had 200 people there in the office, we didn't have a plan. And the leadership was like throwing up their hands. I took over. And I got people organized, I figured out where everybody needed to go. I assigned somebody to go find out if the metro was running, and that was my response to that stressful situation. It's like, somebody has to be in charge, and our leadership is not doing it, because everybody was mortified, and we didn't know if the White House was gonna get hit.
Wow. You're in the
and
right
so-
place in this room.
Oh, well, I guess, yeah, but alone, I just shut down. I have to go quiet, I have to go outside, I have to just go completely internal until I can.
So was it a feeling of responsibility? There are other people here, nobody's doing anything, it's dangerous?
I don't know if I would, I don't know, maybe. There's a gap and I feel.
Yeah.
But we did come up with a plan after that day.
Yeah. Lori, with your dogs, is that a sense of responsibility? It's my job to do something?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think so.
And parents will feel that for their kids too, for sure. Yeah.
I just started looking for solutions. And a lot of times I've arrived at very good solutions just by going over a whole bunch of different scenarios, dealing with that particular situation.
After you've calmed yourself down so you can think clearly, right?
Well, that's the thing, I make myself calm down so I can think.
Yeah, that's that was
It's a
sort of
skill.
my reaction.
Yeah.
It sounds like-
Making yourself calm down is a skill. Skills get better with practice. So, yeah, that's right.
It sounds like there's a continuum though from, being, the gift of being able to move furniture or talk to your dogs or go take a walk up a mountain to 9/11, Boston Marathon, an earthquake that catches us unexpectedly. So there are different kinds of disaster-causing events. And do we need different strategies, or are we saying we need to find our own strategy for the future?
Well, there are different degrees of ramp up.
That's what I'm saying.
Now, there's the slow ramp up,
Yeah.
and you can grab that. Because you're going to see what's the first sign your body's going to give me. Oh, it's this. Oh, I'm feeling that right now. Time to do some breathing. So you can get a grip on that. But the immediate ramp up, like the bomb goes off, that's much harder. It's still, calming yourself down is still a skill that can get better with practice.
So what you're saying is there is skills that we can learn, that if we practice them, I think that somebody said last week, smooth is slow and slow is fast. So we practice the skill now here in the classroom, in our daily lives, and then when we have that fast ramp up, we have that skill.
But I want to go back, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt for a second. I want to go back to something that MJ said a few weeks ago. The most important thing, I think, is to know how you're going to react. And if you're not capable of doing what you think needs to be done, you need to raise your hand and say, I can't do that. I think that's the most important thing in this scenario is, nope, count me out, I'll help over here.
Well, the very first thing is awareness. You have to be aware that I can't do this. Or you have to be aware that stress is starting. You have to be aware that you're lost in the woods. Without that, you don't take corrective action. So awareness is absolutely the first step. But then the second one would be, if you're on a team, you're on a CERT team, and you're overwhelmed, you have to say, I can't do this.
Right.
Yeah, that's number 2. Yeah. Okay, so it would be a useful exercise to think about, later, not now, think about challenging times that you've all had in the past and what did you do. And it would be good to come up with some strategies, more than one. I'll talk about this a little later, actually, but it'd be good to know that. Okay, take care of yourself. So this slide is all about what do you do when you get home. You tell the family, when I want to talk, please just listen, but don't make me talk. But this take care of yourself business, isn't that what the flight attendants tell us, right? When the masks come down on the plane, you put yours on first, right? Well, my experience with this is that helpers, and all of you are helpers, I'm a helper, are really bad at this.
And that's the good news.
We sort of feel like, and I see this in the Red Cross all the time, if there's an ounce of gas left in the tank, we have to go. Think about it. I'm that way too. I'm in that bucket. It's not good. We talk about it, we know the concept, we can tell others about it. Okay, so this exercise, actually, I'll put in a different exercise than the one that's in your participant book or your manual. So this is what I wrote. So this would be something that I really would ask you to do, but I'm not going to be here next week to check on you. So write down your biggest challenge in a response. It might be, dealing with a disaster victim that's been injured and is very bloody, because you don't like blood. You might think, oh, that would be really hard for me. Or, what would be another one? The disaster victim is 5 years old, and that would be really hard for me. Whatever it is, think about what kind of a response situation you could get into that would be really, really challenging for you to deal with. And then come up with short-term, medium-term, and long-term sort of coping, relaxing strategies. What could you do? So we just did the 1-minute breathing exercise. So that's there. The photo, this is one I used to do. I used to keep a photograph of my family in my wallet. And when I was really upset about something or troubled about something, I would just get it out and look at it for 10 seconds. It really centered me. That's another quick one. Tensing and relaxing. If you tense muscles as hard as you can, like you could do your right leg, and tense that as hard as you can for about 10 seconds and then relax. The degree of relaxation you get is deeper than just telling yourself to relax without the tension part of that. So that's another strategy. Medium ones, a short walk, even just around the block. Short meditation. Meditation doesn't have any time length. It could be 5 minutes. Hot shower. These are just examples of things that people have told me, and some that work for me. And there's mine. Get into nature somehow, and then talk with a friend. I had one incident with a park ranger once where his wife killed herself. And so I was talking with him about what kinds of things he was doing to take care of himself. And he said, well, tonight I'm going down to the bar and meet my friend Bob. We're going to have a beer. So alarm lights are going off in my head. But I didn't say anything. And he kept on talking, and he explained, Bob is my best friend. He's the one I feel like I can be honest with. I meet him once a week. We have one beer only, and we talk for 2 hours. I said, okay, that's good. Glad I didn't say anything. Yeah.
I got a question going back a couple slides, you don't have to go back, but you had a comment in there that said, when you want to talk, listen. And I'm not, is that kind of what you're getting at there? I'm not sure what that meant exactly.
Oh, it meant telling your family when you get back what you need or don't need. When you want to talk, you want them to listen. When you don't want to talk, you don't want them to make you talk. You want to be in the driver's seat and listening. When you want to talk, you want listening. You don't want them to start telling you what to do to make things better, which is what most of us tend to do, tell each other what to do. So, that answer your question?
It does, thanks.
So, how team leaders reduce stress. How am I doing on time?
Well, you're an hour in right now, so I don't know how much you got left. Between you and Jenna, I think you got 2 plus.
No, okay.
Another hour?
We're good. I'm not going to take all of that, but.
Okay. Favor 5 minutes.
So how team leaders reduce stress. Well, brief your personnel, that's going to reduce their stress. You can read all that. Let's see. Establish a culture of acceptance. That's interesting. I made a note about that. Let me see. Because I was looking at these slides last night and I was thinking, what's that about? What are we accepting? I think it's honesty. You need a culture of honesty. And get back to what Patricia was saying. You know, if you're feeling so stressed you can't fulfill your role on the team, you need to be honest and say that. And everybody else needs to accept that.
Right.
Yeah.
Could it also be, everybody brings a different skill set and ability level. You're accepting that everybody has something to offer. They may not all be the strongest or the fastest, but they can
Accepting that everybody has something to offer. Yes, I love it. Can I use that going forward?
Please do.
Okay. Yeah.
It's not copyrighted.
Yeah.
Trademark.
Here's this one, diffuse after shift. So a diffusing is just the team leader sitting down with somebody that's going off shift and talking about how it went. We used to have this thing called CISD, Critical Incident Stress Debriefing. And it was the whole process of sitting down with a group of people and talking about how this thing went in excruciating emotional detail, how this rescue operation went. And back in 9/11, that was the model that was used a lot. And it kind of backfired. And I think it backfired because in these groups, there were people with different levels of exposure to the disaster. And so you get these firefighters that were really in the thick of it. I mean, carnage all around, sitting down in the same group with secretaries that were answering the phone. And so what happened is those secretaries got traumatized with that process. And I don't think that anybody uses that CISD model anymore. But this diffusing is pretty safe. That's just a one-on-one conversation. Supervisor to team member. Okay, let's see. So emotional phase of the crisis. Okay, I'm going to do it differently. Look at that. So this is a slide depicting emotional reactions in the aftermath of the disaster. And so here you have pre-disaster level of functioning, and so you start to go down, and so you've got warning, so this is, some kind of disaster that has a warning, like a tornado or hurricane maybe. And so probably going down here because you're worrying, and then there's impact. So the hurricane hits. And then you get this heroic phase, and this is, you may remember this from the early days of COVID. And I'd look on the news and we'd have people lined up to cheer the incoming shift of nurses coming onto their job. And I remember in Italy, they bang on the pots and pans at night. And we're all in this together, we're going to get it. It's that sort of good feeling, solidarity. And it really does feel good. So at some point you get up here and you start to realize what a long slog you're really in for. How big this really is. And then you get the disillusionment slide here. Different trigger events. And this is, down here, is when you get the worst mental health sequelae, the most depression, anxiety, and so forth.
What's a trigger event for something like that?
Oh, it could be an anniversary, or that's over there, well, that would be one. Anything that reminds you of the disaster. It might be watching television and seeing another disaster. So, just anything that reminds you of it.
What does inventory mean?
What is what?
Inventory mean?
Oh, I get you taking stock of, I guess the pluses and the minuses is what I would think about that. Let me show you, let me go on to the next one, because this is a well-known slide depicting, it's based on many, many different disasters. This one, quite similar, but is, I didn't write this, but I was on a team in the Department of Health that produced this during COVID. And the difference here is you've got this much longer trough here, so you're down in the dumps for much, much longer. And that's because there was so much time in COVID where we didn't know how it spread, what to do about it. And then new variants kept popping up, and we'd get a grip on something, and then we'd get set back. So here's, if I go back to this one, this dotted line is the 1-year mark. So you're apart from the anniversary reaction, but right here, you're about at a year, and you're only a little bit below where you started. It's not at 1 year. But if you go to this one, here's 1 year, and you're way, way down. So it took a lot longer for us to bounce back from COVID. And not everybody bounced back on the happy yellow line. There's the dotted line. People that were at the margins of society, maybe unhoused, didn't bounce back nearly so fast. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, I think that disillusionment comes in when you realize how much you screwed up in the heroic part. So, something like, for example, OSO landslides and stuff like that.
Right.
You go in there and you're working yourself as hard as you can and feel good about the teamwork or whatever you can do to maybe make things better. And then later on, you realize, well, we weren't tracking the financials. We didn't keep track of this or that, and the paperwork got messed up. And this really is such a long-term disaster that, you know, things, you get disillusioned when you start having time to realize your mistakes.
Yeah, I think disillusionment is disillusion with all kinds of things. In COVID, it was disillusionment with the government, disillusionment with other groups of people, the anti-vax people. I think it was a disillusionment with a lot of things. So that trough there is where we saw the worst mental health effects and abuse. And I was worried about the kids, because teachers are the ones with eyes on the kids, and the kids were not in school. So the teachers were not there to observe the kids. So, at any rate, that most disasters will follow roughly that pattern. The other difference is it wasn't a single point in time impact. The thing with COVID, it was a rolling impact. It's whenever the impact for you might be when your Uncle Charlie got COVID and died. That might have been early on, who knows? Okay, traumatic crisis can be caused by any of those. I think everybody probably knows that. Let's see. So we'll skip it. We kind of talked about this. It goes back to those different domains in which you can have stress reactions. We talked about cognitive, physical, interpersonal relationships can suffer too. It's not an immediate reaction in the aftermath of a disaster, but it takes a little bit of time. Well, here we go. Here's the slide again. Yeah, relationships. Reduced intimacy, increased conflicts, impatience, feeling isolated. Yeah. Right. So any of these would be considered, if you look at the totality of that, you might wonder, well, what isn't a normal reaction to a trauma? Because this pretty much covers the waterfront. I mean, it would be things like hallucinations and delusions, evidence of psychotic tendencies beforehand would be one. But really, almost anything that you see in the aftermath of a disaster could be a normal reaction, and it might be helpful for the person to know that's a normal reaction, because we tend to feel like we're going crazy. Mediating factors, prior experience with a similar event can go either way. If you have been through a crisis before and you manage to find strategies to help you cope, you come out of that crisis stronger. And that means you're going into the next one stronger with some confidence because you were able to cope the last time. But if your prior experience with a disaster did not result in you coping very well with that disaster, then you're going into the next one in a weaker position. More fear, more anxiety, because you didn't do well the last time. Intensity of disruption, yeah, all those are going to mediate. They're going to determine how big is your reaction. Let's see, stabilizing survivors. Bullet point number 2, there's a typo. You want to get injured people to help.
No, it's okay.
You're the one who's going to help the uninjured ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you might recruit them to help you.
Yeah, you could.
Or get uninjured people to help you with what you're doing.
You can do that too.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's
Everybody hear that? You can get uninjured people to help you. It gives them a sense of purpose, something to do. And, yeah.
Exactly.
Help survivors connect with natural support systems. If they have somebody, I see this all the time in the Red Cross world. People come into a shelter. They don't want to come into a shelter. Nobody wants to sleep in a gymnasium with 300 people 18 inches away on cots. If Uncle Charlie is across town, they're going there. If they have any other place to go, they're going to go there. And so helping survivors connect, if they've got somebody that's in their support system that still has a house, you know, that would be a good place for them to go. Okay, so there's a hierarchy of needs in a disaster. There's actually a hierarchy of needs all the time, but you don't start talking to disaster victims right away about how they feel about things. The most basic need is safety, right? Get out of the cold water. Get out of the burning building. That's number one. And then comfort-related things, food, water, warmth, shelter, and then maybe information. Information is really, really important. It can calm people down. When the Red Cross sets up a shelter because this apartment building burned, partially burned, and everybody had to evacuate because we don't know if the building is safe to live in anymore, so they're all in the shelter. They're safe, they're in the shelter. We're giving them food, water, warmth. So what's next? Information. They want to know when they can get back into their unit. I've seen people go back into the burning building because Fluffy was still in there. Okay, let's see. Listen, protect, connect. Listen to survivors. Pay attention to what they say. We're going to talk more about listening. Help survivors feel protected by providing support. Yep. Connect them to friends. Yep. Okay. Okay. Empathic listening. Listen for meaning, not just words. So, there was a psychologist named Carl Rogers who built an entire school of psychotherapy on this, called either client-centered therapy or non-directive therapy or Rogerian therapy, same thing. And the idea is that you really listen to people, and then you kind of, when there's a little bit of a break, you summarize back to them the gist of what they said with kind of a questioning tone. It's like saying, I think you said this, is that right? Blah, 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 blah. And the effect of this is that you're communicating to them that you're trying your level best to listen to it. That's where the power of this is. So when you paraphrase the speaker, you're doing it as a check on your understanding of what they just said. Okay, let's see. So the main idea here is to give the other person the feeling of being deeply heard and understood, which, if you think about it, is rare in the world. Where do you find that? You find that in psychotherapy offices, probably, a lot of them, hopefully a lot of them, probably not all of them. You find that with faith leaders, probably, tend to be good listeners, maybe not all of them, but hopefully a lot of them. But if you have somebody in your life who can listen this well, you're darn lucky. These people are rare. This is, I mean, I just, in the last 20 seconds, summarized the gist of how to do this. But you can't do it on the basis of that. It's hard. It takes a lot of practice. Let me see, let me go back to this one. This is not all of psychological first aid. There is a training called psychological first aid offered by a lot of people, a lot of versions of this. There's even a smartphone app you can get if you want it. And it goes through about 10 things you can do, but we're going to focus on just a few of them. Making a connection is as simple as coming up to somebody that looks distressed and saying, "Hi, my name is Carla. I'm with the Red Cross. It'd be okay if we talk for a little bit." Something like that. Do you need some water? And then the active listening, that's the bit about summarizing what the person said back to them. And encouraging resilience and educating them about the normalness of their reactions. That has to come after active listening. Active listening is the big money part of this. Yep.
When I was teaching kids how to listen and how to do active listening, we called it the McDonald's technique. You paraphrase back what they said for understanding, for clarification, like they do in McDonald's window when you make the order. The kids like that. It's a good way to remember.
Oh. Oh, that's good. I guess it's been so long since I've been to McDonald's, I didn't know that. But
or any fast food place,
Yeah.
they always repeat you.
Yeah.
Starbucks, have you been to Starbucks lately? They do that.
Okay, yeah, that is. So the main idea that we all have about listening is you listen for a few minutes and then you start to make suggestions about what somebody could or should do to alleviate their stress. And it's a slippery slope, and I fall into it too, even though I know this stuff cold. I just have to stop myself because that never helps. Suggesting to somebody what they could or should do is, if you become aware that you're doing that, please stop. Shift back into active listening. And I've done that, and I'll say, "Oh, wait, excuse me, I just realized I wasn't listening to you well enough. I'm going to reset and start to listen better right now." Yeah?
But you could say, do you mind if I make a suggestion? Or are you, or something like, take a deep breath. Do you mind if I, asking their permission to do that?
You could. I would try and do, so there's a sequence here. You want to do as much active listening as you can. They'll run out of gas eventually. But you want to do as much listening as you can. And after that, you get to the point where you can do things like normalize their reactions, reassure them they're not going crazy, talk about possible next steps that they can do. But I probably wouldn't start out by suggesting something to them. I would start out by asking them about how they coped the last time they had a similar challenge. Yeah?
Is that true if they're panicking? I mean, wouldn't you want to be able to say, could you deep breath with me or?
Yeah, I probably would if they're panicking. I probably would do that. Yeah, because they're not even, they can't even really talk
Right.
if they're panicking. Yeah. So usually distressed people have a story to tell, and it helps them to tell it. And your job is to listen to it. So you do this non-verbally. So in any interaction, more than half of what gets communicated non-verbally. So being fully present for them, how do you do that?
Eye contact.
Yeah. Same level. You don't want to be standing up, talking down to them, eye contact, head nod, just like you just did, which says you're tracking me. Yeah. Yeah. Non-verbal acknowledgements like, which you just did. Yeah. Respecting boundaries, be quiet. Yeah, okay, you can read all that. You do this verbally by asking them a question. I call it a door opener. Something that can get them going. How are you doing right now? How can I help right now? Or just tell me what happened. You want open-ended questions, which means questions that can't be answered with yes or no. Because those pull for the other person to start talking. They start talking and you get confused. You have to clarify that confusion right away. You can't let that confusion run because it's just going to build and build and build. And after a while, you're going to have no idea what they're talking about. And so you have to say, excuse me, Bob, but I'm starting to get a little confused. I thought you said doop-da-doop-da-doo, but now I'm hearing you say bop, bop, bop. Am I right? And Bob will straighten you out. And it doesn't hurt the process at all because it communicates to Bob that you're trying your level best to follow it. Periodically summarizing the essence of what they said, check your understanding, express empathy, and then you have to stick with it. To a lot of people, it doesn't feel like they're doing very much when you do this. If I deliver a psych first aid training to firefighters or police, those are take charge, do it. They want to do something. Same with park rangers. They want to do something to solve the problem. Listening to them sort of seems namby-pamby, like they're not doing anything. So they're tough audiences for me to train. Okay, don't do any of these. So that last one, this is tricky because remember I said over half of what gets communicated verbally. If you're feeling judgmental about this person that you're working with, that's likely going to come across somehow. So you either have to fix it or find another responder to talk to that person. How do you fix it? Well, you might be able to stop yourself, take a deep breath, sort of recenter, and say, I need to have a different view of this person. That might work. What not to say, those are probably obvious, except this one may not be obvious, and I understand. It's not your job to tell somebody who's in distress that you understand them. You may think you understand, but if you do understand, it's not 100%. So that one doesn't help. The rest of these are just terrible. Everything will be okay. Well, you can't guarantee that. You can say things like, if somebody's not sleeping in the aftermath of a disaster, troubling nightmares, let's say. You can say things like, what we find is that over time, these troubling symptoms gradually tend to dissipate. And that almost always happens. So that's a true statement. I didn't say to them, you will sleep better next week. I give them the general trend. So things that are okay to say. This, what you need. This work has an immediate focus. You're not, and they may want to focus on something down the road, like how am I gonna get the money to pay the rent next month? No, it's what do they need right now? That's what we need to focus on in this kind of work. If there's a death scene, you're not gonna know what local laws and protocols are. That's what your supervisor's for. Talk with local authorities, that's probably also your supervisor. If you happen to be talking with a client at a death scene, you want to face them away from the carnage. So now they're not looking at it while you're talking with them. Okay. So prepare yourself. Rescues can be pretty darn unpleasant. We talked about all these, I think. Yeah, I think we talked about all these.
Ren, I have a
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
About the I'm sorry. Like, when we're working with people in trauma, we really focus on trying not to say I'm sorry because it's not like the person who's helping's fault that this is happening. And so you're subconsciously, putting, like, even though I understand it's an empathetic thing to say, and so we switch the words, or at least, I mean, I do it where it's like, this sounds really painful. This sounds like a really painful experience. This is, like acknowledging and verifying, but not putting, is there something to that, or should I?
I tend to say, I'm sorry you have to go through this.
Oh.
That's what I'm sorry about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
But good point. Yeah, I like it. Let's see. So I gave you a homework assignment. Think about the hardest thing you might face in a disaster response, and then come up with several short-term strategies you could use to calm yourself down and start to think more clearly. Several medium-range things. Like, think of it as short-term might be around a minute or less. Medium might be 5 to 10 minutes. And then long-term, like if tomorrow's your day off, what could you do tomorrow to recenter yourself? And then write those things down and keep them. You're going to need them someday. So. And I think that's it for me.
Pretty good, we are 1:35.
Okay, Jenna?
Can we give them,
Yeah.
Let's take a 10-minute break, let's be back at 10:45.
Good late morning. It's really nice to be here, and I just want to say how impressed I am and how much I respect all of you for the depth of training that you're getting, the depth of knowledge that you have, and the many, many different things you do in a disaster or in an emergency. And I saw you at work during COVID. It's just wonderful. So I just wanted to let you know about that part. And I have a background in mental health. I was the coordinator of the school counseling program for Highline School District, which, as you know, is a large urban school district in South Seattle with many needs. And I was also the coordinator of the student homeless education program. So part of my job, besides leading those groups, was to write grants to bring more mental health resources into the schools, and to write grants to bring more resources for homeless students as well. And in addition to that, I was the lead for the crisis team for the district. So our crisis wasn't natural disasters, it was man-made disasters. There were a lot of deaths by suicides, there were murders. It's a pretty tense area around White Center and that area. We had a lot of free and reduced kids. But the advantage of that was most of my grants were successful because the needs were so great. So I also taught graduate classes in different parts of psychology and student counseling, student counseling. So then I retired after 25 years. I got tired of commuting every day,
and started doing training therapy dog teams, different kind of therapy, but kind of the same basis of working with kids, and that you reward the behaviors you want to see. So with the therapy dogs, then I got in a little deeper, and I became an evaluator of therapy animal teams. I evaluate 9 different kinds of animals for being therapy animals. Lots of llamas, lots of cats, mostly dogs. But then I became a national trainer and went around the country training people to be evaluators of therapy dog teams. So that's kind of my background right now, my retired job, as I say. And then COVID came along, and we all know that took 3 years out of our lives, and I'll talk about that a little bit later and what happened there. So, but what I'm going to talk about today is kind of the organization, and I don't know how much you've talked about this. You can chime in and let me know what you know, but I know when I joined, which was a long time ago, I was really confused about who did what, and who was your supervisor, and who was this, and who was that. And then when COVID came along, I learned a whole lot about everything. So I know that you as new people into this system might be a little confused about who does what, when, and where, except for CERT. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. We all know the Vashon Fire District is, in an emergency, is the lead. The incident commander would be Chief Vinci. He would be the overall incident commander. The emergency operations center would be right here in the Penny Farsi building. We'd be using all these different rooms. And the emergency operations manager is Rick Wallace. I'm sure many of you know Rick Wallace. And Fire District works very closely with Vashon Be Prepared. And Vashon Be Prepared is our emergency coalition on Vashon. I'm not going to talk too deep a dive. You're going to talk a little bit more about that this afternoon. But Vashon Be Prepared is our disaster preparedness. They train, recruit, bring people in. It's an umbrella organization. Excuse me, I knew this was going to happen as soon as I started talking. It, as I said, works closely with Vashon Fire and Rescue, and to help mitigate the effects of a disaster. So, that's what I need. If you want to know more about Vashon Be Prepared, VashonBePrepared.org is their website, and most of what I'm going to say is on there. You can take a deeper dive into that. So, when COVID came along, I think a lot more people became aware of Vashon Be Prepared. We did the situation reports. Usually a situation report in a disaster is for internal, for the people working on a disaster, but they externalized it and they put it out in the newspaper, they put it on Voice of Vashon, so people became aware and really looked for that situation report. It was daily for a long time, and then it became weekly, and then we pulled back a little bit more, and that has now morphed into the Vashon Be Prepared newsletter that comes out weekly, which if you aren't signed up for that, I would really recommend it. It gives you the state of what's going on with in Vashon with COVID, with events around preparedness, and it's very informative. So, next slide, please. So as I said, I just went over all this. I won't go over that again. We can go to the next slide. We do have an organization chart for Vashon Be Prepared, and this is it. You're going to get a copy of this afternoon, so you can always go back and look at that. The reason I'm bringing it up today, I'm not going to talk about all these other units or teams that are in Vashon Be Prepared, but I am going to talk a little bit about MRC. They call it Medical Support Branch. It's actually the Medical Reserve Corps, and you probably know them best for their parts in the situation report, in the newsletter, They set up the testing units, they set up the testing sites for COVID, they set up the vaccine sites for COVID. How many of you worked as a volunteer in COVID? Oh, look at this, you guys are great. We had a lot of CERT people that worked as volunteers at the vac sites and the testing sites. And under this, one of the branches of the Medical Reserve Corps is the Community Care Team, which is the team that I'm the lead of. And we have 5 people on our leadership team. They're all here today. So I'm just going to introduce them briefly. We have Ren, our trainer extraordinaire and consultant because of his background in the Red Cross and all of his knowledge. We have Carla Prine, who heads up the Spiritual Resources group, and she's got a deep background in, well, she's a retired Episcopalian minister, among many other things that she has done. Next to her is Leslie Drehos, who is a new member to our leadership team, and she's right now helping with administrative things, and whatever else we ask you to do, right?
Right.
Other duties as assigned, that thing they always have on job applications. And then we have Lawrence, and she is our administrative person. She keeps everything together, our notes and meetings and all of those kinds of things. And we have Heidi Jackson, who is our community liaison, and she keeps us in touch with social services on the island, kind of the tone of things that are happening on the island. So these people worked throughout 3 years of COVID, kind of keeping our team together. And I'll talk a little bit more about our team in a minute. But I did want to talk in a little bit more about the Medical Reserve Corps, because I don't know how much you know about them. It's a national program, and our Vashon program works a little differently because we are an island, but we adhere to the national tenets of Medical Reserve Corps. And it's in the event of a disaster, medical services might be overwhelmed, especially on an island where we can't get help from outside. So we have volunteers, doctors, nurses, other people, mental health people that come up and help when our resources are overwhelmed on the island. So, as I said, it includes nurses, doctors, chaplains, pharmacists, veterinarians, funeral home, administrative, and just others who stepped up. We had so many people step up in COVID. There were 12 people that were coming to our meetings regularly before COVID. We moved our membership up to 100. That was pretty impressive. It just seemed like when we had a need, that person would step up. And we had a need on our CCT team for somebody with a deep background in emergencies, and Ren goes, hey, I'm not an island resident, but I can help you with this. And so people like that have really good skills and talents. They work on a triage model, hands-on care. They don't do, not all MRCs have a mental health component, but we felt that that was important on Vashon to have that component. So, in a disaster, MRC would set up a field treatment site, which is a place where they could administer services and care for people. One of our mental health people from CCT might be deployed to be there just to help with talking to people and giving people comfort. So that's about all I'm going to say about MRC right now. No, I have one more thing to say about it. There are 4 different parts to MRC. There's the physician's part, the nurse's part, then our part, the community care team, which is behavioral, mental health, and spiritual care professionals that work with people, and then of course their administrative team. So, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the uniqueness of Vashon Island because it does drive what we do here in an emergency. So we are a rural community of 10,000, 11,000 people. We have an average population of 55 plus. We have geographical isolation. That
that is something that's very important to know about when we're in a disaster or an emergency. There's a long drive to access care. We have no urgent care on the island. So in an emergency, it's really important to have those doctors and nurses on call. We have to look kind of after our own shelter, food, and support. If the ferry system is down, which it very likely could be if we had something like an earthquake. So what all that does is it impacts mental health and feelings of isolation, and it can cause fear, anxiety, and uncertainty. We'll talk about that later. So when COVID came along, the community care team stepped up. And the community care team was created in 2006 by General Joe Ulatowski. Probably some of you people in here know Joe. He actually started all of Vashon Be Prepared back in the day, and he is a brigadier general. He is still living on the island. I think he's 97 something, correct me if I'm wrong. An amazingly powerful person with a big heart. 2008, a CCT team was organized, and Dr. Bill Carr, some of you may know him, he no longer lives on the island, he became the lead. I joined the team at that time, and we had meetings. We were trying to set this up. We were really under MRC at that time. But we kept meeting and figuring out what we were doing. We completed a CCT field manual in 2013, and then things became kind of loosey-goosey, and we didn't have a disaster or anything to pull everybody together. But in 2017, Lynn Kerrigan became the lead, and in 2019, I was asked by Dr. John Osborne, who was then the head of MRC, if I would take over that lead position, and he also talked to Carla. So there were two of us on the team at that time in 2020 when COVID started, and we became activated by Vashon Be Prepared. You probably know that in a disaster, there's an activation from the top. It starts with the chief, and he activates, and then all the other teams get activated by their team leaders. So CCT would be activated by first Vashon Be Prepared, and then MRC, then I would activate my team. Our team grew from the 2 people to 30, and we're all under MRC, so we're part of that 100 that is under. And we had a couple of community meetings inviting all the mental health practitioners we could think of, and that's how we grew our team. And people joined, people just stepped up. It was absolutely amazing. So we were activated, fully activated for about 2 years, and then kind of semi-quasi-activated for a while. So, next slide. So, as I said before, the community care team is the mental health, behavioral health unit of the Reserve Corps, and we're charged with mental health. We do crisis intake, we do needs assessment, triage, we give people resource information, we provide individual and family support, and just any kind of emotional, psychological support that might be needed during a disaster. And this was very important because when COVID started, we started up the spiritual care arm of CCT. So we added to our mental health services, we added spiritual care, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Just some of the basic roles and functions, and you can kind of read through this. I talked about the first one. We collaborate with existing mental health. We want to make sure our job is to not supplant or duplicate services that are already on the island, but to do something else that might be needed during a disaster. So we work with mental health on the island. We work with substance abuse, domestic violence, with the faith community, with the funeral home, and as I said, we supplement local resources. We provide crisis services, that's what Ren talked about, psychological first aid, and spiritual care in needs related to public emergencies. So we talked about these things already. And one of the things that is important for you guys to know is that we also are charged with caring for the emergency volunteers, the emergency response volunteers. And that self-care that Ren talked about, being able to know that you might need some help from somebody if you're going through compassion fatigue or secondary trauma or burnout, that it would be very important for you, and sometimes it's hard to recognize, but for you to reach out to somebody, and our team we're the people that you could reach out to. It's interesting, Ren was talking a little bit about what happens when you get stressed out, and as we all know, going through COVID, that long, elongated period of being stressed was really intense. We did reach out to the Vashon Be Prepared volunteers. We sent out a survey. We asked them about compassion fatigue. We asked them for how are you feeling, how are you doing, what are your levels of anxiety, and that kind of thing. And then do you need some support, or do you have support? Do you need some support? What we got back is, you guys are a tough group of people, as Ren said. You don't like to acknowledge that you need help. We don't like to acknowledge that we need help. And we got back from most people, yes, I'm feeling anxious, yes, I'm feeling, maybe a little depressed, upset, but I have a good support system. I'm doing okay. So we didn't get much response of people needing help, but it's good if you can do that. And one of the things that just since I started putting this PowerPoint together, I got 2 different messages about compassion fatigue and secondary trauma. And one of the things is that one of the latest studies has shown that emergency response workers have a higher level of alcohol use than the general population, which is understandable, but something to think about, because that can be one of the symptoms of compassion fatigue, burnout, or secondary trauma. So we'll move on to the care of the spirit. I wanted to talk a little bit more about that, because this team works with people on the island of all different types of spirituality, and we don't adhere to any one thing about that. We recognize that there's a lot of different communities on the island, and it's not religious. But during COVID, we set up a website for CCT, and Carla, for the spiritual care part, put on pages and pages of poems, prayers, and meditation practices that you could do. And if you just went on to that, and photographs were incredible. Some of them were island photographers. If you just went onto that site and started reading a particular poem might stand out to you, or a meditation practice. It was a really nice thing. I think they're still out there actually on the site. So if you wanted to go to the CCT site, it is Vashon Be Prepared /mental health, and you can look up and see some of these things. Our response to COVID, different kind of disaster altogether, and different kind of response. So the first thing that we did was set up a helpline. It wasn't a hotline that was 24/7, but it was open 12 hours a day. And our mental health professionals all stepped up. We had 12 different people that manned that line, woman that line. And this is one of our esteemed counselors that was on the line. We had 2 extensions. We had a mental health line you know, you need some support. And then we had a Care of the Spirit line for people that wanted to talk to somebody about that. Everybody was trained in psychological first aid, because one thing about psychological first aid is it's not counseling, it's not therapy, it's different, it's crisis counseling. You speak to people differently. I mean, you have the same skill set, obviously. You have the listening and the how are you, those kinds of things. We did a data collection on our helpline so we could see who was calling, what were their needs, how could we better serve them. We learned from our data collection. We sent out postcards with the helpline number on it. We put it in the beachcomber, we put it on the radio so people would be aware of it. We got a lot of, most of our people that called were in response to those postcards because they went out to every island resident. Kudos to Heidi, she knows how to do all those postcard things and make a wonderful design and all of that. There was a good response to that, and we were able to help people that needed things. Sometimes it wasn't necessarily mental health. I know one guy called, he was in a panic because he needed to move, he had to get out right away, and we had a group of people go over and help him move. I mean, you know, people did step up. Again, most of our things were not in person, so it would be very different than in a normal disaster. We set up some Zoom support groups, and again, we found we were trying to reach isolated seniors, but we found people didn't really reach out to the support group idea. I think we do something different than that. We had community collaboration. As I said, Heidi is our person who keeps us in touch with what is going on in the community and mental health and all other island social services. And then we had the therapy dog teams come in. We have 7 therapy dog teams on the island, and they were deployed to be at the vaccine sites. Particularly, we started out with adults, and then we knew we really wanted them to come when we did the vac sites at the schools. And the doctors said, we couldn't have done this without you. We are so glad that you are here. And, it's important to know that a therapy dog can only work 2 hours because they get really burned out and fatigued, and they're taking on a lot of, so that says something about what all of you guys do, that, you know, work 12 hours of nurses and doctors and all those people. But anyway, we do protect our therapy dogs. The teams with the students were absolutely amazing. And the doctors would go, or the nurses, hey, we need a therapy dog team over here, you know, and because there were a lot of kids that were afraid of vaccines, and the dogs just calmed everybody down. So,
Jenna?
yes.
I'm curious, with your data collection, from the time you initiated the response to COVID to the time you kind of wrapped things up, what did the data tell you? How did you adjust? What were the big things you kind of changed?
We didn't do data collection on all the parts of the things. We only did it on the helpline. And because we wanted to know who was calling, when they were calling, you know, we had the demographics of the people that were calling. And we didn't really need to adjust anything. It was more for information. But, yeah. So maybe we should have done it for everything, but we just did it for that particular thing. Oh, we can go to the next slide. So another thing we did during COVID was the suicide prevention campaign. I'm sure you know that during COVID and after COVID, the suicide ideation, thoughts, and suicides rose somewhat. So we did a thing on the island, and we worked in conjunction with the University of Washington for one of the programs they had, which was very helpful. We got really good feedback on this, looking for signs how to talk and listen to someone who is going through that. We had an anchor event at Vashon community center, Bashan Center for the Arts, which we also put on Zoom. And we had suicide survivors, and then we had a psychiatrist talking to that. We put trainings online, we did trainings in psychological first aid, we did trainings in suicide prevention, we did trainings on creating strength and building resiliency. That's a whole other workshop that is good for anybody who works in emergency response. Next slide. What we would do in a normal, is there a normal disaster? What we would do in an emergency is set up a family assistance center. We weren't able to do that during COVID because obviously it would be going on for 3 years and we couldn't do things in person. So that's a safe, protective, supportive environment for people to come to, for community members. Anybody can come. We collect data on reunification and family information. We're in contact with the field treatment site, so we know about people there. We can inform people that might come to the Family Assistance Center about people that are being cared for medically. We notify families of positive identifications of victims. We share situational updates. Ren talked a little bit how important it was for everybody to be aware of what's going on and those situation reports, and we would be in contact with the EOC about that. And then, of course, the main thing is providing that behavioral, emotional, and spiritual care to families that come in. We would have different rooms for counselors to go into and talk to people. We would have food and blankets and tea and coffee and all of those things. We would also have computers for them to use. We would have charging stations. We would have burner phones for people to have if they needed to have a phone. Anything else, guys? What else do we have at a Family Assistance Center?
Access to resources.
Access to resources, thank you, yes. We could refer people that needed things and we would be aware of where they could go for certain resources.
Just a quiet space where someone could go and just sit down, lay down.
Right.
And not talk.
Right.
Just be quiet.
And the other thing that we would have at the Family Assistance Center is stuffed animals for people, but we would also have real animals. So I brought in Fox, who is she's my therapy dog, but she's everybody's therapy dog. And, I see. So she was one of the dogs that went in and comforted everybody. And just as a point of clarification, therapy dogs are for other people. They're trained and certified to go out and help people. They have to be non-reactive, they have to be calm, they have to have an aptitude for this work. One thing she's not trained about is looking for crumbs on the floor. And so certain things you can't train dogs out of. And here we go. Let's go back over here, okay? Okay, sit. So that's what therapy dogs do. Service dogs are dogs that serve the person they're with only, and emotional support dogs are kind of a nebulous category. A doctor or a psychologist can write a note and say this person needs an emotional support dog, and they get to go with you places. They're not certified, they're not trained. There's a bit of a brouhaha about that. I know, in the airlines they've had a lot of incidents, and now they don't allow emotional support dogs. So there needs to be a bit more in that category.
An observation I had at the middle school when the dogs were there, there were a couple of them that would actually go seek out certain children that had a lot of anxiety. They weren't acting out, they were quiet, but they were so scared.
Yes.
And those dogs actually went and seeked those children out and stayed with them until it was, they were done and leaving. And it was amazing. It's the first time I've seen emotional service dogs.
Yeah.
And it was, yeah.
Yeah, I've seen her do that many times. I take her to the airport to Comfort Travelers, and same thing, she'll go, well, one situation was, she went right over to this man, there was a couple, and the wife said, I kind of went, okay, she said, well, he has PTSD, and she knows he needs therapy. Anyway, it was helpful. Families down on the floor with her, guys in suits, a lot of pilots and flight attendants stopped there and say hello. But no, at the back centers, they were really impactful. So I just thought I would introduce you to Fox. You can come and say hello. That's pretty much what I have to say. And are there any questions about anything for Ren? Or, as I said, you're going to get a deeper dive into some of this afternoon. But I appreciate your attentiveness.
It's interesting. I love animals myself, and just stroking their fur is a very common thing, and it seems to be a universal
Literally
stress
lowers your blood pressure and your heart rate. They've done so much research on the benefits of this, and I could go into a lot of stuff about that. But as I said, the dog has to have the aptitude. It has to be one of those dogs that can search people out. She's usually equal opportunity when she's at the airport, and there are 5 people in line, she'll kind of go to each person. Sometimes she'll stay with somebody a little bit longer, but you can come up and say hello to Fox.
Is that training for her, or is that just community
No, that's
support that you're
what
doing at the
we
airport?
volunteer at the airport, and we have a shift there. Yes.
I'd just like to point out to everybody the outreach to the Spanish-speaking community that got started during the COVID. And in an odd way, during the vaccinations area, we had translators who speak Spanish, and they relieved a lot of anxiety on some of the people who spoke Spanish, just being asked if they wanted to speak Spanish instead of English, and helping people with. We had several young Latino guys who were deathly afraid of needles, and just talking to them really helped them a lot. So, and I think that ongoing outreach to the Spanish-speaking community is a really important community function here.
Yeah, and just overall, bringing emergency preparedness to the community. I think for us, it also kind of destigmatized mental health, because mental health is talked about a lot, and reaching out and getting help and taking care of yourself. I think on the island and in the general population all over the country, all over everywhere. So anyway, this is another one of our therapy dog teams. Looks a lot like Fox. Go to the next slide. We have Sue and Molly. I just want to tell you, Molly just got her 7th certification. These dogs have to be certified every 2 years. She's 15 years old. Sue, her handler, is in the back. She's been working for 14 years as a therapy dog, and she's amazing. She's still just like a circus dog. And there's Fox helping me at the back site when we were there, reading my instructions. Yep. And I need to have my paw on your arm. That's right. Because that's where it goes. Take a pulse. Questions?
So, I'll give an example. You may know that right now it's the Seattle County Clinic. It's a 4-day event aimed at homeless and low-income people. It has medical, dental, vision, and mental health. And I worked this event 4 times. And one time I was called into the dental area. This dentist said he had a woman, she needed a procedure, I forget what it was. And she was too anxious. And so she was about to get up out of the chair and escape. In fact, she did get up out of the chair and escape. And I went to talk with her, and I talked with her about, well, what do you do to calm yourself down? Well, I get my dog. And so what kind of dog do you have? How big is it? So she described this. So then I went to the head of the therapy dog team, and I said, do you have anybody with a dog that's this breed or this size? And she said, yeah, we got one of those. I'll bring her in, and they're all connected by radios. So we brought the dog in, and this person immediately started calming herself down with the dog. And then I went to the dentist, and I said, could you do this procedure that this woman needs with the dog in her lap, in your chair? And he said, yeah, I could. And so we got it done. Yeah.
Well, just some of the other places when the community care team, community care center was on the island, a lot of therapy dogs went there. And we also go into schools and meet with kids. We've been to universities during finals week at different colleges around. There's a lot of places that these guys are used, and dentist offices, where are we going? There might be food in one of these bags. Okay, anyway, thank you so much for being here.